Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cast, and welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Turnabout Storm. When Friendship is Magic was in its prime, there was a veritable mountain of large, ambitious, and diverse fan content. Crossovers were no small part of that content. Some of the most popular fan works in the brony community were crossovers with other popular franchises. Portal, Doctor Who, and of course, Fallout. Seriously, Fallout Equestria was basically its own sub-fandom. It's amazing how many of the franchises I've been introduced to and grew to love in the last decade can be traced back to an MLP project. A lot of you know that Doctor Who's kickstarted my love for Doctor Who, but on that list of properties that I have to thank My Little Pony for piquing my interest in is... Take that! Yep. The ponies were responsible for introducing me to Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. It's really kind of impressive that this got my attention at all. I knew little to nothing about the Ace Attorney series before this. I had seen Phoenix and his famous objection speech bubble around online, of course, but that was about it. I'm not even sure if I knew it was a game about being a lawyer. I also usually don't care for human winding up in Equestria stories in general, whether they're inserts or fictional characters. I find the concept dull and unimaginative. But I was starved for MLP content during the hiatus between seasons 4 and 5, and this was a really popular series with the brony reaction and commentary community at the time, so I decided to give it a try. I binged the whole thing in a weekend and bought the first game a week after that. I'm not alone in this admiration either. This crossover, Turnabout Storm, is really well regarded by both bronies and Ace Attorney fans, making new fans out of both. Even now, over a decade later, yes, I hate that Turnabout Storm is over 10 years old now too. If I had to grapple with that reality, so do you. So what did Turnabout Storm manage to do to make this unlikely pairing work so well? Well, let's take a closer look. Turnabout Storm is a 6-part, 7-hour video series created and written by Neo Artemis, telling the story of how Phoenix Wright is whisked away to Equestria when Twilight Sparkle tries to summon the greatest defense attorney to defend Rainbow Dash after she's accused of murdering another pony. Together they investigate this grisly crime that took place in Everfree Forest, because of course it did, this is My Little Pony, and work to defend Rainbow Dash against a tough prosecutor with an unrelated grudge, because of course they do, this is Ace Attorney, and in the process find the truth behind what really happened on that dark and slightly stormy night. Now, on paper, this sounds absolutely ridiculous. The most outlandish stretch of a premise that only graces the most obscure corners of fanfiction. But as you watch the story unfold, if you are familiar with both franchises, you start to notice how well this actually works. True, this might seem like an odd matchup in terms of demographic, since the Ace Attorney series has no less than 4 murders per game, but like Friendship is Magic, at its core, Phoenix Wright is a wacky, off-the-wall set of events that occasionally takes itself seriously. It's just that when they do get serious, it's really serious. All those dramatic twists and tough conflicts are combined with some of the most eccentric characters and absurd developments you will ever witness. It's what makes it such a magical experience. Because of that, dropping Phoenix right into the center of Ponyville works way better than you might think. If you're an AA fan, you're right alongside Phoenix being introduced and trying to navigate the fantastical world of Equestria, and if you're an MLP fan, you're watching as Twilight and the others stand perplexed at this outsider getting acquainted to how their world works. One thing I noticed rewatching this is that it does something really well that the Ace Attorney games can have trouble with. See, Ace Attorney is a very story-heavy game series, so it's essential to play the games in order. But they also try to make each new entry accessible to newcomers. As such, we have the rookie phase, where we need to find story reasons to reintroduce the traditional mechanics and maybe new ones. Usually this means putting a different attorney behind the bench for the first case, or in the case of Justice for All, giving Phoenix amnesia before a case that was so badly put together on the prosecution's end that Phoenix was able to break it down while suffering from a major brain injury. And it's great. I love Lost Turnabout. Screw the haters, sorry. Anyway, Phoenix getting used to the workings of Equestria and how to argue points about it in court is a great way to translate that feeling. Phoenix is still experienced, but he's also trying a case involving magical ponies. He's gonna feel a little lost. If you're a Phoenix Wright fan, you're right there with him trying to understand it. If you're a brony, you're face-huffing with the rest of the ponies as Phoenix makes more and more confusing observations. One of them is perhaps the best comedic moment in this entire series.
A storm cloud? You call that decisive? How could you place blame on my client for that? Unless you're honestly suggesting Rainbow Dash can move around clouds and make them shoot lightning at will.
I just love how that's Phoenix's first big confident moment in court. He does his signature objection, the triumphant music begins to play, and then that's how it plays out.
Why is everyone staring at me like that?
Awkward.
Yeah, it's hilarious that someone like Phoenix is so out of his element, but what makes it work even better is where he does know what he's talking about, but the ponies don't. Murder trials. As you might expect, murder rarely, if ever, occurs in Equestria, so navigating a case like this is uncharted territory for the candy-colored equines. It makes for a more level playing field, where one character's expertise doesn't overshadow another's. The personalities of the eccentric characters in MLP work really well alongside the kind of characters Phoenix is used to dealing with too. The pieces that make up this case manage to incorporate contributions and connections to all the main six. Applejack and Rarity aren't in it for very long, but they still play essential roles, which was nice. Also, both Friendship is Magic and Ace Attorney have a fondness for punny names, and the fact that both sides point out how strange the other's names sound with little to no self-awareness adds some delight for sure.
The plot is puns.
Even the faults the series has in its writing somehow feel very true to the franchises they've incorporated into it. Let's talk a bit about comedy. Now, first off, let's make one thing clear. Turnabout Storm is funny. Like, really funny. Like, I forgot how funny it was. Watching it again for this review, I was laughing out loud multiple times. Wordplay, dry remarks, observational blunders, and referential humor aplenty. 80% of it is great. I really admire how they incorporate referential humor. Of course, there are tons of nods to both MLP and Ace Attorney, and they are a blast. The MLP side of that coin came with its fair share of brony-specific jokes, too. Some of the more obvious references...
I don't get it. It doesn't hack. Hacking is what you do with daggers and axes. And knives!
Yeah. Okay, seriously, she's freaking me out now.
And some way more obscure.
What's that you're holding?
Oh, it's just a pine cone. Some kid dumped it on me as evidence. Cute, huh?
Yeah. Cute. Can I
actually had to look up this one because I had no idea what the scene was meant to get across. Apparently, in the very early days of the fandom, there was some fan art of Trixie eating pine cones, and it became a meme. The more you know? The same goes for the nods to Ace Attorney. I obviously didn't catch all of it on my first watch through, but I've since been able to appreciate all the times Turnabout Storm pokes fun at the conventions of the Ace Attorney games, and blending them in with the encounters Phoenix has in Equestria.
But with this streak of success, he gained a few skeptics, thinking that all his victories were a result of cheating and other dubious methods.
I'd probably think the same if I saw someone winning at everything they do.
See, those are the kind of subtle nods I missed the first time around. You can interpret that one in a lot of ways, and frankly, all of them would be appropriate. My personal favorite in hindsight is pondering what it would be like for other Ace Attorney characters to wind up here. Edgeworth would absolutely be a brony, and I am not taking questions on that. And as much as I like Maya, it's probably for the best she didn't get whisked along too. Could you imagine her trying to channel the victim? How her body would change if she had to channel a pony? Wait, what am I saying? I have the internet.
One Google later.
There we go. Aw, that's actually kind of cute. There's also a lot of jokes making pop culture references not related to MLP or AA, but unlike how this kind of humor can usually be, especially in fan projects, looking at you, Double Rainboom, they're not too in-your-face and obvious most of the time. You have to be really up on your pop culture to catch all of them.
What are we trying to find here anyway, Feeny? A magical stone? A secret chamber? A prisoner? A cup? Maybe something you ordered? Oatmeal?
Oatmeal!
So yeah, a lot of the humor works, but what's really amazing to me is when it doesn't work. There are some groan-worthy jokes and puns, but honestly, it kind of works. Both MLP and AA have the occasionally lame joke in it, so it feels really in spirit for them. Selling the authenticity of your fan project by even transferring some of the bad parts from that series into it is a whole new level of impressive to me, whether it was intentional or not. Apologies if it wasn't. But the most important aspect of the writing for a series like this is the trial and the murder case it focuses on. We'll talk a bit more in depth about this later, but I wanted to address this on a more surface level first, especially going into the series not aware of the conventions of Ace Attorney and revisiting it very familiar with them. This is a perfectly done Ace Attorney trial set in Equestria. The setting of the trial gives us a little bit of both worlds, with those participating in the trial being an even split between human and equestrian. Of course, we have have Phoenix on the side of the defense and Twilight as his co-counsel, but presiding over the case is none other than the judge. Like the one from Phoenix's world.
The defense is ready, Your Honor. Your Honor!
Mr. Wright, fancy meeting you here.
Because Neo Artemis and their team either had trouble deciding which pony could fill that role, or they didn't want Phoenix to be wandering around Ponyville as the only oddity. Either way, I'm glad they went this direction because this was my introduction to the judge, and he's great. I mean, he's insufferable, but it's great, and I love it. Besides, he is by no means the biggest roadblock in this courtroom. That honor goes to the prosecution, who for this trial is Trixie. Trixie took this job as revenge against Twilight by sending one of her friends to the sun. Oh yeah, the sentence for Rainbow Dash if they lose this case is banishment. I don't know if I've explained that yet, but that was kind of the only punishment for wrongdoing we knew about in Equestria at this point in time, so they really ran with it. Just imagine if this had come out after Discord's introduction. The sentence could have been petrification. Honestly, Trixie's bombastic attitude, magical flourish, condescending attitude, and referring to herself in the third person fits in perfectly with the attitude the prosecutors Phoenix is used to facing off against. I know there was a shallow pool of characters to work with at the time, but they really couldn't have picked anyone better. But the case and trial itself were, I imagine, the toughest parts of this to write. Not only are Ace Attorney trials built on getting the most information and use out of the slightest of details, so connecting the dots is a challenge on its own, but then there's the fact that, again, we're in Equestria. And we're in Season 1 Equestria. Like a lot of early fan projects, if you wanted to tell a more lore-heavy story, you kinda had to reverse engineer some mechanics from what MLP had already given us, or make a bunch of stuff up. To be honest, I'm surprised at how sound the Equestrian logic they thought up for this case still is after all this time. Things like lightning making the thunderous sound from the vibrations caused by impact and cloud ballistics make sense based on what we already know about how things work in Equestria. And as far as I remember, you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, the show never manages to add anything that contradicts any of what Turnabout Storm posits about weather. Then again, weather pony work got way less prominent after the first couple of seasons, so that might be why. All is to say, it's a very even split between the two worlds that have collided for this crossover, which is way more difficult than people might suspect. This could have very easily have just been Phoenix stumbling his way through Equestria, or a murder case that just happens to feature characters from My Little Pony. But instead, it's a near perfect partnership of what both have to offer the other. A good demonstration of this is Phoenix and Twilight's team up. The two of them talking and informing each other about how differently their worlds work is a good way to get the uninitiated members of the audience more educated on each franchise if they aren't familiar with one of them or both. It's kind of the audience, well, at least as kind as these franchises usually are, and fits with their characters. The only place where Phoenix Wright dominates the crossover is the presentation, which makes sense. If you want to choose between a fully animated cartoon series and a video game originally for the Game Boy Advance whose visuals consist of still images and 4 poses per character, I'd want to go with the latter two. Now, for the sake of being balanced, before I talk about the positives of Turnabout Storm's style, because there are a lot of them, let's get a couple of the criticisms out of the way first. There are quite a few growing pains with the show visually, which can make viewing the first couple of episodes a bit rough, especially all these years later. Don't get me wrong, a lot of this was impressive for 2012, considering this was before objection.lol or more widely available vectors for the ponies. But going back and seeing things like spelling errors in the text, blurry sprites, and stretched out JPEGs clearly ripped from screenshots of Friendship is Magic definitely shows this project age. Also, the location text is off center, and it's never fixed, and it bothered me every time. Alright, bad stuff done, let's talk about the good. I don't want to come across like I'm saying everything in parts 1 and 2 look bad. It was appealing for the time overall, and a part of the art style that still holds up is the backgrounds. Some of them are ripped right from Friendship is Magic, but some areas had to be completely built from scratch to serve the case, and they look really good. The best of these is without a doubt the courthouse. They could have just ripped the courtroom assets from the games. They do look similar, but the fact that they decided to make their own backgrounds that would look more equestrian, but still make Phoenix feel like he's on his own home turf is very admirable. Plus, again, it just just looks really good. From a visual standpoint, this is a project that definitely improved with time. Not only is practice the best teacher, but well-known animators and artists started contributing to the project as it went on. I assume because it got so popular, more people wanted in. By part 4, the team behind Double Rainboom were making new pony puppets. Thanks to the HD remaster of the original Ace Attorney trilogy for mobile in 2012, the team had access to better looking sprites, and man was it a glow up. There were even a few animated cutscenes animated by Mr. Ponyator, including one in that pointy pony style from A Candlelight Wedding that we all collectively fell in love with. And it's the best, it's so cute. Visually, Turnabout Storm started out as looking good enough to feel familiar to both fan bases, but certainly improved over time to become something that looked truly impressive. The voice work is also excellent, even when it's behind a less than impressive microphone. It's another one of those growing pains that was in the first 2 parts. This is a very dialogue-heavy series, and unlike the games that inspire Turnabout Storm, it's all fully voice acted. So this would be a pretty tall order for anyone that got to participate, but everyone here really rose to the challenge. The performances are magnificent. They're all really good impressions of the MLP characters, and for Phoenix and the judge, who didn't have official voices at this point in time, they couldn't have made better choices for them. The story also demands a wide range of emotion from most of them, and once again, they really deliver no matter what is asked of them, creating some of the most hilarious, suspenseful, and sentimental moments I've ever heard in a fan project. A lot of big names in the brony fandom made an appearance in the project as well. Rena Chan, Nowacking, and my personal favorite, the judge, was played by none other than Keiko and Gilly, aka the original Dr. Hoovs from Dr. Hoovs and Assistant. They even make a self-referential joke about this.
What's the matter?
It's that pony over there.
Him? What about him?
He's been eyeballing me since the trial started. He's making me kind of nervous.
Why don't we just ask him why he's doing that?
And that's the thing. I feel as though I'll create some sort of paradox if I do.
I am he, and he is me.
We are all together, Kichu.
What more could I have asked for in 2014?
Special delivery!
Yes!
But the standouts, of course, are our 2 leads, Twilight and Phoenix. It seems weirdly hard for me to find a convincing Twilight Sparkle impression in fanworks, maybe it's because her voice is the least exaggerated of the group, but Shiro Usagine does a fantastic job portraying our favorite book horse genuinely. And Phoenix... oh, Phoenix. Phoenix Wright is played famously in the project by the Gold Crow, and it's perfect. The dry yet exacerbated delivery of comedy, the confrontational and defiant moments in the courthouse, the warm moments of connecting with the ponies and getting to know them, it's all so well done. When I played the first Ace Attorney game, I read through Phoenix's lines in Gold Crow's voice, and even now, when there are many official voices to choose from, I still catch myself doing that. It's just that good.
I guess I accidentally called upon the greatest defense attorney, period. Go figure, huh?
Oh, Cosmos, you flatter me.
Now, I'm not the first person to review Turnabout Storm. Most of them go over the presentation and how they managed to make the crossover work so well, and that's where it ends. Usually to avoid spoilers. But that's not how we roll here, let's talk about. We're Spoiler Central. Considering it's been almost... 10 years since the final part of Turnabout Storm was released, I figured it'd be okay to have at least one video out there that goes into the specifics of the story, the characters, and how everything plays out. However, I also recognize that not everyone has watched Turnabout Storm, and I don't want to discourage anyone who might have become interested thanks to this video so far from giving it a watch. So, for your convenience, I'll be putting in timestamps for the next 2 sections of the video. From here on, we'll be going into minor spoilers, and I'll give another warning when we head into major spoilers. That way, you guys can decide for yourself just how much you want to hear about this project. If you want to avoid all spoilers, but are still wondering if you should check out Turnabout Storm, you absolutely should. It's worth every minute of its runtime. I cannot recommend it enough if you are a fan of either Phoenix Wright or French of His Magic. Alright, back to the review. Going back to how this crossover is written, I think a good way to really show how well these 2 properties work together is to see how their 2 leads work together. Twilight and Phoenix have such a great dynamic that it's crazy to think they were never meant to interact. Phoenix may admittedly feel a bit more at home with a purple-clad female companion as his co-counsel, but while Twilight and Maya are very alike in how outspoken they are very different characters in pretty much every other way. While Phoenix may be tasked with leading the case, he still doesn't know anything about Equestria. Twilight is there to fill in the blanks while also providing her own opinions on the investigation and the trial. A detail I appreciated about Twilight's role in the trial is how often she's perplexed at how confused and astonished Phoenix is by things like magic and dragons. That's to be expected, but what's nice is that it's not in a condescending way, just in confusion. She might find it unusual that Phoenix isn't aware of this stuff, but is always eager to teach someone in need of a lesson. I really like that distinction. It's an easy one to miss. However, while they start off as a good team, seemingly making up for the other's weaknesses, it's not a partnership without its difficulties. While both of them are headstrong and determined, they have very different approaches to tackling this trial. Twilight's mindset of wanting to study and be as prepared as possible contrasts heavily with Phoenix's fly by the seat of your pants until you figure something out method. Phoenix's ignorance about Equestria is a problem, but so is Twilight's difficulty dealing with the unfair atmosphere of the courtroom. She takes the proceedings very personally, which is easy to do when her friend is the one in the defendant's chair, and only gets worse with how Phoenix handles the proceedings, having to interrogate and accuse her friends to help Rainbow Dash. The final straw being when he casts suspicion on Fluttershy for the murder. Now, I get why he did this, and it was absolutely as a last resort, but since Twilight can't hear his inner monologue like we can, this causes ripples in their partnership. This leads us into a very clever approach to parts 3. Yes, parts. Part 3 of Turnabout Storm is split into 2 investigation segments. One where Phoenix tries to navigate around Ponyville in a search for the truth behind the crime, and one where Twilight tries to take over the case herself as Rainbow's defense. With the aid of what I can only assume is the player's guide to the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles.
Scour the land high and low for evidence pertaining to the guilty culprit with aid of thy loyal assistant at thy side. Cliff note, preferably a female adolescent.
Both parts of Part 3 has some of my favorite material in Turnabout Storm. One of the appealing things about crossovers is getting to see characters who would never meet under any other circumstances interact. Phoenix running into Twilight and her friends provides just that. By the time Part 3 came along, I was anxiously anticipating what Phoenix's impression would be of every pony he came across. The fact that he spends most of this investigation with Pinkie of all ponies only adds to the amusement. And it would have been so easy to put Twilight on the sidelines as Phoenix's assistant, filling that often needed role. Instead, the split in the investigation segment means they both get an equal amount to contribute to the story, and keeps this as a proper crossover instead of a Phoenix Wright happens to be an Equestria story. Both are in unfamiliar situations, and are annoyed by that, but while Twilight stubbornly wants the facts to bend in her favor, only truly understanding the full picture when she discovers more for herself, Phoenix knows he doesn't know everything, so he gathers as much information as he possibly can until he can see events clearly. Deep down, Twilight and Phoenix are very like-minded characters. They're clever, just, and will do anything for their friends. They both have wise mentors they'd want to be proud of them, almost living their lives by that very hope and goal. They'll do anything to help those beaten down and in need of a friend, even if no one feels like they deserve sympathy, and especially if they have a personal connection to them. They're adamant in their virtues and unmoving in their convictions. There's enough differences between these two to lend itself well to comedic moments and create conflict, but they have enough alike that it feels really good when they come back together and see how far they get in all this working together. When it comes to the other characters' roles in the story, I really like the choice of Rainbow Dash as the defendant. No offense, but she seems the most likely of the main 6 to get herself in a jam like this. The writing represents both her good and bad character traits well too, right down to the incident that started all this. See, this all happened because Rainbow was being threatened to lose a race that the victim, a Swift, was also competing in, blackmailing her so that if she doesn't cooperate, Ace will expose some compromising photos of Rainbow that, in a really smart move, they never actually show us. The audience's imagination will do better than anything you could possibly create. This conflict and how it played out display the duality of Rainbow Dash's pride to me. She cares a lot about how other ponies see her, so of course she wouldn't want pictures like that getting out, but she has too much integrity as an athlete to throw a race because of this. It is admirable, but Rainbow is still not one to let incidents like this slide, and her attitude is what gets her in trouble in the first place. But still, I like that. She was both responsible and reckless. It feels like how something like that would play out on the show. Fluttershy, on the other hand, seems a bit off to me. She plays an important role, being the star witness creates some great conflict in the story and with Rainbow Dash, but overall she comes off as a bit too naive for me most of the time, which might annoy Fluttershy fans like myself, but then again, this was season 1, this was pretty on par for Flutters, especially in fanworks, and she does get some real heroic moments later in the series to make up for them, so I guess it balances out. While Fluttershy may have gotten the short end of the stick a bit, Pinkie really shines in this story. Her obliviousness is more funny than frustrating and bounces really well off of Phoenix during her time investigating with him, really fitting some of Phoenix's other dynamics with assistants. Easily one of the best versions of Pinkie in a fan project, especially from the early days. Then there's Trixie. Like I said before, she was the perfect choice to play the role of the prosecutor. She really gets under Phoenix's skin, not because she insults him and is an infuriating prosecutor, although he doesn't exactly enjoy that, but because she doesn't care about getting to the truth of this matter. She only wants to punish Rainbow Dash, not even for anything Rainbow did, but to get back at Twilight. Admittedly, making the reason for standing in trial connect to a more personal grudge is nothing new for the Ace Attorney series. In fact, I think it might be required, but where it gets more interesting is the realization that this is about more than what happened in Ghostbusters. Trixie is implied to have a much deeper resentment towards Twilight, particularly despising her friendships and wanting to destroy them. We never really find out why she harbors these feelings, which annoyed some people, but I personally didn't mind. The implication alone added an extra layer of motivation to Trixie's actions and an unspoken tragedy to her character, that considering we only had her appearance in Ghostbusters to go off of at the time, would have been lacking otherwise. But because we can't quite realistically accuse any established MLP characters of murder, although if this had been made around season 5, I'd raise an eyebrow at Bonbon, Turnabout Storm needed to introduce some new characters. Original characters, if you will. This is easy to scoff at, but the new characters they created are pretty good and add that extra level of suspicion needed to heighten the case. The only one worth talking about at length, though, is Sonata.
It's Taco Tuesday!
No, not that one.
Ugh, go back to sleep, Sonata.
This Sonata was Ace's manager and was suspicious right from the start. Like, from the very second she shows up. Even if you watch Twilight's investigation section first and your introduction to Sonata was this...
Excuse me.
Right, sorry.
There were some skeptical glances in her direction, no doubt. However, if this pony is hiding secrets, it's clear that it's going to be tough to uncover them. Sonata is able to get to the root of some ponies' vulnerabilities with her talent of perception and diffuse any confrontation by turning it around in her favor. She's, well, intimidating. There's not really another word for it. She is a dominating force of an antagonist, using her talent for its worst possible purposes and being cool and collective the entire time. She's the kind of character who knows she's capable of holding control over any room and takes advantage of that. There's also the extra layer of conflict she elicits in Phoenix specifically, bearing a striking resemblance to his late mentor Mia, but being completely different from her in every other area, especially in morality. Phoenix's connection to Mia and how much he wants to uphold the ideals she taught him is highly prominent in this story. I may not have been familiar with Ace Attorney at the time, but I could really tell how important Mia was to Phoenix and how big a deal it was for him to be confronted in this way by Sonata during such a challenging trial. Trixie may be the prosecutor here, but Sonata presents herself rather quickly as someone else to antagonize Wright, and on a much more personal level too. A pair with conflicting worldviews that will eventually come to a head in the courtroom. At this point, I am going to get a bit more specific regarding the case and trial of Turnabout Storm. I won't be going over every single detail because, like any Ace Attorney case, there's a lot of small moving parts and details that contribute to piecing the case together, but aren't necessarily worth presenting bit by bit. But if you haven't watched Turnabout Storm yet and don't want to know how the trial plays out, this is your last chance to back out. The one thing Turnabout Storm had to get just right to feel authentic and like a proper send-up to the Ace Attorney series above anything else is a well laid out case. One with twists and turns, where the most minute details hold the most importance and where the audience can follow along and try to figure out what really happened that night alongside Phoenix and Twilight. Turnabout Storm excels in this department. Shenanigans and seemingly unrelated events lead to vital pieces of information. There's a very effective use of red herrings with stuff like Fluttershy taking care of exotic animals when she's not sure how the zoo knew about her, which is not as important as you might think looking for suspicion in anything. And what proper hints there are have great great payoffs. There's a great one in episode 1, where Twilight and Phoenix find this giant feather at the crime scene. Just from that, of course everyone immediately suspected Gilda. There are some great misdirects with this feather, first by suspecting it belonged to one of the exotic animals Fluttershy has, and then introducing another Griffin character to throw off the scent. But then came part 4, and lo and behold...
Witness, name please. Gilda.
This is just one of those mysteries where it's super satisfying to figure out certain parts of it so far in advance. Not that it's much help in the trial at first. I can't say for sure because I haven't played the sequel trilogy yet, but Gilda might have given quite possibly the most unhelpful testimony in Ace Attorney history.
Rainbow Dash killed that other pony with a storm cloud. I was there.
That was no testimony!
With every roadblock, there's a solution that makes the path clearer, and with every victory, there's a setback. Part 4 is especially engaging in that respect. It lulls you into a false sense of security, apparently piecing the whole thing together despite some seemingly unrelated plot threads still dangling, but it also starts to build up the idea that our heroes might lose the trial after all. I still find myself holding my breath as they ramp up to that guilty verdict until Best Pony storms in and saves the day. And unlike people who followed along with the series as it was released, I actually knew there was a part 5. In the description of part 4 of Turnabout Storm, Neo Artemis left a note about that thing that will peeve everyone off. And going through that roller coaster of developments only to realize there's one more super secret part to go probably did fulfill their prophecy at the time. But it was absolutely worth it because part 5 is exceptional. You could call this the final boss. Everyone had their eyes on Sonata, and now it was time for her to take the stand. It's just as challenging for Phoenix as you would expect too. She shuts down Trixie almost immediately and basically takes on Phoenix herself from the witness stand. It's a proper demonstration of Sonata's abilities and intelligence and how she wields it to antagonize others, becoming the dominating figure no matter who should really have that authority. It's a tough battle to find even the smallest contradictions in her lies, trying to find them right alongside our Ace Attorney and his book horse co-counsel. It's gripping, it's intense, and so much is on the line, but this is a My Little Pony Ace Attorney crossover, so there's still time for jokes.
Defense attorneys fabricate the most interesting little fairy tales to protect criminals.
You know, something's wrong when a talking unicorn accuses you of telling fairy tales.
If this trial had just ended with Sonata having committed the murder, I think everyone would have gone home happy. But Turnabout Storm doesn't settle for that. It doesn't paint this crime as a black and white incident. What MLP and AA also have in common is that the motives and actions of the bad guys are usually more complex than they might first appear. And the important thing is to understand why someone did what they did, rather than rush in and serve punishment. How the final act of this trial plays out displays this magnificently. One of the main themes of Ace Attorney is that people are not just good and evil, and one of the big recurring themes in MLP is that if someone examines their actions and is giving the support they need, they could find a new, better direction in life. For 2 series that seem to have very clear lines on what good and evil is, whether taking place in a fantasy world or using the legal system to guide conflict and resolution, they are both series that are surprisingly gray on the matters of right and wrong. It's not always as cut and dry as people in universe or even the viewers might want it to be. Sonata may have committed many questionable actions helping advance Ace's career through blackmailing and hurting Pony's lives and careers by exposing their vulnerabilities, but she starts to regret her actions and tries to make a change. But it backfires, and in the act of defending herself, she convinces herself she killed Ace. She may use every trick at her disposal to get to Phoenix, but nothing works. Sonata holds herself in a way where she can see through every pony, but no one can see through her. Until Phoenix. He sees right through her, perhaps deeper than even she does. Even after everything she did, and everything she thinks she's done, Phoenix still wants to help her. He helps people in trouble with no one on their side. That's kind of his whole thing. Sonata is all alone and convinced she deserves to be, but Phoenix knows that's not true, and if there's one thing more important to him than helping those in trouble, it's uncovering the truth. The final testimony of Turnabout Storm is kind of a triumph. It ties up pretty much every loose end laid out through the previous entries, while unraveling the mystery every viewer was speculating about in real time. Whether you were shocked by the revelation of what really happened, or guessed it at any point in the story and were finally validated, it's an immensely satisfying conclusion to the trial. That the whole thing was an accident. A set of events triggered by the victim's own selfish, aggressive actions until it led to his demise. I should mention that this was the prevailing theory for viewers as far back as part 2, based on the reactions and commentaries I've watched, and it was mine when I first watched it as well. So you'd think that would lessen the weight of it, but the combination of the pieces to the puzzle being laid out so expertly, and the story of the ponies surrounding this murder being so rich and three-dimensional, makes this solution all the more grand. These properties are not about just winning or catching the bad guy, they're about discovering the truth behind people and ponies, why they do what they do, and maybe even give them the chance to do something better. Which is why it's fitting that even after the trial ends, there's still an hour left to go, spent wrapping up all sorts of character conflicts and relationships into a neat bow. My favorite part is when Phoenix gets to read Twilight's latest friendship report. It's so sweet and summarizes the themes of this crossover, and possibly both theories that inspired it, beautifully.
Dear Princess Celestia, I learned something from the most unlikely pony, Trixie. I thought about something she said today, and I think she's right. Friendship is unnecessary, like art, poetry, and music. We don't need it to survive like food and water. Rather, it's one of those things that gives our life, and other lives, value and meaning, giving us a reason to push forward. It allows us to achieve feats of strength and valor we thought we never had in us to protect the ones we care about. And by uniting, even the biggest of problems can be overcome. But then that's where Trixie was wrong. Ironically, that word she mocked ended up saving the day. That's the magic of friendship. It should never be underestimated. And I can see right now that tears will clear the way for a deep and lasting one. Your faithful student, Twilight Sparkle.
It's perfect.
There's a lot I could say about the epilogue of Turnabout Storm, but honestly, I think the best way to understand why it leaves such an impact up until the very last second, seriously stick around for the credits, is to have experienced the entire thing beforehand. It's an immensely satisfying conclusion that's so well done, you still don't want it to end. But you can be assured that everyone came out of this journey with something special, including the audience. Overall, there were a lot of ambitious projects conceived in the brony fandom, but the community that had this many incredibly creative people in it, that's no surprise. But most of these projects fell through due to other commitments, legal trouble, or just a loss of passion for the idea. So when a huge fan project manages to completely tell its story from beginning to end, and tell an incredible one at that, that deserves to be celebrated. And Turnabout Storm might deserve the biggest celebration of them all. As one of the many strange crossovers with My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, it respects and has fun with both properties the entire way through. You don't have to be familiar with both franchises to enjoy Turnabout Storm, but you appreciate it a lot more if you are, which is the most important and toughest test any crossover can pass. It's one of those series that I don't know anyone who watched it and didn't thoroughly enjoy it. Considering how much of a commitment it is to sit down and watch a 7-hour fan-made crossover, that should tell you just how good it is. It starts out pretty good with some of the typical growing pains of a fan-made series, but evolves into something truly impressive and moving. The visuals are a near perfect blend between the world of Ace Attorney and the land of Equestria, the voice work is stellar with not a bad performance to be found, the trial is intricate and well executed in both its roadblocks and solutions, the characters are well represented with amazing exchanges and relationships, and the story and writing as a whole can match up to anything Phoenix Wright or My Little Pony has ever made. This is one of those true peaks you come across in fandom from time to time, where passion for the original is captured by truly talented people who want to have their own take on it while staying true to what they love about those original stories. You see it and feel it in every second that passes by, in the good and surprisingly in the bad. That is exactly what Turnabout Storm represents. It's one of those fan works that got so popular, it developed fans all its own. There's no shortage of unofficial continuations or works expanding on things exclusive to Turnabout Storm. Some of the more notable examples include a spin-off telling the story of Turnabout Storm from the prosecution side, with Trixie recruiting Miles Edgeworth, Dick Gumshoe, and Professor Layton during her investigation into Ace's death. And there's this one pony who's modeled after a detective from Ghost Trick, who Edgeworth recognizes for some reason. It's kind of weird and didn't get really far in the story, but the voice work is really good, and I'd say it's worth at least one viewing for the novelty alone. There was also a fan-made game called My Little Investigations. Modeled after the Miles Edgeworth investigation games, this saw Twilight investigating cases around Ponyville. This one was also cancelled after difficulties behind the scenes, which was a shame because it was very popular and well received. Though I've never played it myself, but I could be persuaded to. Perhaps on the channel if this video does well enough. And most recently, we have the full-fledged, unofficial sequel, Elements of Justice. This is the most ambitious and professional follow-up to Turnabout Storm out of them all, with plans for a full 5 cases to tell its story in. At the time of making this video, only 2 of these cases have been completed, but it's been really good so far, and I anxiously await each new installment that comes out. But that might be a subject for another day. All in all, Turnabout Storm is one of the best fan works I've ever experienced. Once again, My Little Pony introduced me to another series I now love dearly in the Ace Attorney franchise. You know, it's kind of crazy how many of my pop culture interests today I owe to the pastel ponies. Is that weird? Maybe. But if you got a problem with it, to that I say... Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you thought of this crossover in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. And let me know if you want me to cover Elements of Justice. I'm very tempted to because I do have a lot of thoughts on it, but it's so much larger than Turnabout Storm that we'd probably have to do a video for each case, and the second case just ended and it's like 16 hours long, and part of me really wants to do it. But again, let me know. Want to give a special thanks to Jinx from Jinx Productions for providing the title card gag. Really appreciate that. Go show him some love in the comments and over on his channel, which you can find in the description. And of course, a very special thanks to my patrons who help support this content, including Chelsea A. Crandall, David L. Sproul, Hawk Hero, Jinx Productions, and Wait in the Wings. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys next time.